Tonight, many of America's farmers already feeling the pinch are worried about the possibility of more challenges.
And we're going to lose another generation of farmers.
There was a time when American wheat wasn't just a commodity. It was a cornerstone of global food security. For decades, it fed nations, supported economies, and filled bakery shelves from Seoul to Paris. When you bought American wheat, you were buying stability, consistency, and a legacy of excellence. It was the gold standard. But now, that standard is crumbling, quietly, relentlessly, and the world is watching. Today, we're not talking about a temporary hiccup. This isn't a one-season drought or a freak storm. This is a full-blown confidence crisis in American agriculture. And it's unfolding beneath the radar, through canceled deals, empty shipping containers, and warehouses packed with unsold grain. What was once America's pride is now becoming its problem. One of the first major shocks? The Philippines. For years, it was one of America's most loyal wheat buyers, importing millions of tons annually. Up to 90% of their wheat came from U.S. fields. Then, in May 2025, everything changed. Without warning, a top flour mill in the Philippines pulled the plug on a 12,000-ton order of U.S. wheat. No negotiation, no delay, just canceled. And within days, a new deal was signed. But this time, the wheat came from Canada and Australia. Why? Because reliability beat price. American wheat was still cheaper, sometimes by $8 to $10 a ton. But buyers didn't care. What used to be a selling point, low cost, had become irrelevant. Behind the scenes, internal reports labeled U.S. wheat as high risk. Too many political swings. Too many shipping delays. Too many unknowns. Each ton came with a gamble. Suddenly, a trusted partner had become a liability. The ripple effects hit hard. In Kansas, Nebraska, and North Dakota, regions that live and breathe wheat, the train stopped moving. Freight cars stood still. Contracts weren't renewed. Grain piled up in silos, with some storage sites reporting a staggering 40% increase in unsold stock over the previous year. And then came the labor crunch. With tighter immigration policies and mounting restrictions, the seasonal workforce vanished. Fields across Oklahoma and South Dakota sat untouched. The harvest rotted. In some cases, desperate farmers did the unthinkable. They set their own crops on fire. Not because they wanted to, but because they had nowhere to send them. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, bakery shelves in Manila stayed full. But not with American grain. Pandesal, the Philippines' daily bread, started rising in price when the U.S. supply stuttered. But when Canadian wheat arrived, the market stabilized. Quietly. Efficiently. No disruption. No drama. A quiet win for someone else. And the dominoes didn't stop there. Next up, France. A country where bread isn't just food, it's culture. 4 generations, France sourced premium Durum wheat from the American Midwest. It was the foundation of every croissant, every baguette, every flaky brioche. But in 2025, imports from the U.S. hit a 20-year low. Millers in Marseille, Rouen, and Le Havre looked elsewhere. Canada stepped in. Even local French wheat, despite a tough season of flooding and inconsistent yields, started gaining preference. Why? Because U.S. shipments were late. Chemical residue levels exceeded new EU thresholds. Carbon emission scores flunked environmental reviews. And worst of all, the paperwork. A single missing certificate. A policy shift in Congress. A surprise tariff. That's all it took to block an entire shipment. French importers couldn't take the risk anymore. And just like that, the century-old pipeline between America's wheat fields and Europe's bakeries began to shut down. Back in Kansas, co-ops scaled back operations. Harvests were delayed. Expansion projects were shelved. Some farmers stared at warehouses filled with thousands of tons of product that nobody wanted. And they started to wonder, is this the end of the line? As America's wheat industry stumbled, Canada surged forward. Canadian exports to the EU spiked over 40% from the previous year. They had the tech, the logistics, the timing. Smart harvesters, digital protein tracking, automated inspections, all of it wired into a supply chain that actually delivered. In Saskatchewan, a wheat order could be confirmed in hours. In Manitoba, it arrived exactly on schedule. The flour? Identical in taste, texture, and quality. But the source? That had changed, and nobody complained. Then across the Pacific came another blow, South Korea. For nearly 4 decades, South Korea leaned heavily on American wheat. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a dependable, mutually beneficial trade channel. U.S. wheat was in everything. ramen noodles, pastries, even snack cakes. Until it wasn't. By mid-2025, U.S. wheat share in the Korean market collapsed, dropping from over 35% to less than 17%. Meanwhile, Canada filled the vacuum, climbing above 60% in record time. Why? 3 letters. MRL, maximum residue limits. South Korea toughened its glyphosate regulations, and U.S. wheat failed the test. In some cases, residue levels reached 400 parts per billion. Canada? Most shipments clocked in between 30 and 70. Clean, consistent, compliant. Korean importers had a simple choice: pay extra for testing, insurance, and potential rejections with U.S. wheat, or just buy Canadian. Guess what they chose? By June, American wheat had practically vanished from the ports of Busan and Incheon. Canadian shipments rolled in like clockwork. South Korean food manufacturers stopped even mentioning American flour in their procurement meetings. And back in the U.S., Washington State, once a cornerstone of Korean exports, reported a 36% spike in unsold inventory. Idaho farmers began converting fields to flaxseed, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. And this was only the beginning. Then came Mexico, and this one hit different. Not just because of the volume, but because of the relationship. Mexico wasn't just a top buyer of American wheat. It was a neighbor, a partner, a market built on decades of shared borders and trust. Over 3 million tons a year. Gone. By mid-2025, that trust had frayed. Imports of American wheat fell by nearly 40%. Canada's share jumped by more than 35%. And quietly, a new player entered the scene: Argentina. That's how fragile the situation had become. Buyers weren't just looking north. They were looking anywhere but the U.S. Why? Red tape, changing tariffs, export forms that shifted monthly. One shipment stuck at the Texas border held up production for an entire Mexican food plant. Storage costs ballooned. Delivery windows closed. And Canada? Smooth as butter. Paperwork clean. Trucks on time. No last-minute surprises. Mexico didn't hold a press conference. It just shifted. Manitoba Mills, sensing opportunity, installed new testing lines to meet Mexican requirements. Arizona blending plants closed down. Farmers in Texas slashed prices by 20%. Still, orders dried up. Another door closed. And then there was Italy, the land of pasta, the temple of Durum wheat. For decades, Italy relied on the U.S. for high-protein grain, the kind that gave spaghetti its signature bite and texture. But by 2025, Canada owned the market. 45% of Italy's durum imports came from the north. The U.S.? Just 15. Again, this wasn't about price. This was about precision. Canada had evolved. They didn't just grow wheat, they engineered it. Research labs developed new durum strains tailored to Italian pasta standards. Logistics were integrated with real-time inspection. When a pasta plant in Naples orders 40 tons, it arrives, exact protein, moisture, elasticity, every single time. That's what Italy wanted. Not just quality, but control. And Canada delivered. Meanwhile, the U.S. system, battered by internal politics, labor shortages, and outdated infrastructure, couldn't keep up. So Italy moved on. Not with noise, not with drama, but with quiet resolve. This is what 2025 has looked like for American wheat. Not a spectacular collapse, not a sudden crash, but a slow-motion abandonment. A shift in allegiance. A quiet exit of customers who once built their industries around U.S. grain. From Southeast Asia to the Mediterranean, from North America to Europe, the message is the same: we need partners we can count on. And today, that's no longer the United States. Canada isn't cheaper, but it's consistent. And in a world full of uncertainty, consistency is king. So what now? Can the U.S. rebuild trust? Maybe, but it won't be with discounts. It won't be with marketing. It will take real, systemic change in policy, logistics, inspection, and delivery. Because the world isn't just buying wheat anymore. It's buying reliability. And that is something America has to earn back. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, hit that like button, subscribe to Global Pulse, and let us know in the comments. Do you think the U.S. can recover its place on the global food stage? Because this isn't just about wheat. It's about trust. And trust, once lost, doesn't come back easily.